All right. Good morning and welcome to the Wisconsin Counties Association's educational webinar series on county board rules and conducting the county organizational meeting. You made it to week 4. Congratulations to all of you that joined us for all 4 weeks of our webinar series. Today we are going to focus on the county organizational meeting. I'm Sarah Deidre Kasdorf, Director of Outreach and Member Engagement for the Wisconsin Counties Association. I have the pleasure of joining you today, making a few welcoming remarks, and then turning it over to our speaker for today. As we have the last few weeks of this webinar series, our presenter will talk to us for a bit, go through his PowerPoint presentation, and then we will open it up to Q&A. If at any time throughout the webinar you have a question, please feel free to input that question into the chat box or the Q&A box. We will be monitoring that, both of those throughout the webinar. Again, this webinar is being recorded and it will be placed on the WCA website along with Andy's PowerPoint presentation. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Phillips. Andy, I'm going to spare you reading your bio today since we've done it now for the, this would have been the 4th time we've done it. I think everybody knows Andy Phillips, attorney extraordinaire from Von Briesen and Roper, person who knows all with regard to county government. So Andy, I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. You really put the pressure on me. If I'm supposed to know it all, I better not mess this one up. Welcome everybody to the last installment of this series. This is actually, honestly, I want to say it's the least time intensive part of this series in terms of the organizational meeting. I don't have a ton of material to cover because the organizational meeting is really one of those items that different counties do it different ways, and that's okay. So we're going to talk about that today, but then I want to wrap up and kind of give a recap of what we've talked about in the previous 3 webinars and what we're going to talk about today. But I really, really hope that everybody came with their questions and their comments and their enthusiasm to participate today, because I think that the organizational meeting, like I said, is different in every county, but I would love to hear stories and examples of what different counties do with their organizational meetings. Just as an aside, I have been to several organizational meetings. I've chaired a few organizational meetings, and I've had a great time doing it because the organizational meeting is the time to welcome all of the new members that are just elected. This is the first meeting they're going to go to. And so it's a really exciting time in the life of a county board. And so if we look at the organizational meeting in the right way, it can be a terrific experience for everybody. So let's talk a little bit about the organizational meeting. I want to talk a little bit about basic elements associated with the organizational meeting, even though the statutes don't prescribe a whole list of items that we have to cover in the organizational meeting. There are some things that we do have to cover, and the statutes do cover that. So we'll talk about that. We're going to discuss how to run an efficient organizational meeting. We're going to, again, echoing comments that I have made in this webinar series throughout. We're going to discuss how board rules can help set expectations for an effective organizational meeting. And then we're going to see, what do some different counties do based on my experience, and hopefully you all are willing to share what you all do. What do you do with the organizational meeting to use it as a platform for success over the next 2 years? So we'll talk about all of those items. But first, let's start with the statute. There's a statute 59.11 on the books that discusses this concept of an organizational meeting. And it uses the word shall. So the board shall meet on the 3rd Tuesday of each April to organize and transact business. Now, this statute doesn't apply to Milwaukee County. Milwaukee County can have its own rules as it relates to when it meets and when it organizes and things like that. But for all 71 other counties, we have to meet on the 3rd Tuesday of April to organize and transact business. At this meeting, the board may, we don't use the word shall, but the board may transact any business permitted at the annual meeting, which happens in November, including the appointment of county commissions and committees. Now, when I look at this statute, I tried to do a little bit of a dive into the legislative history. And unfortunately, we don't have access online to all of the historical information dating back to the late 1800s and early 1900s. So I went back as far as I could go, and this language has been about the same for as far back as I could go. I think it's a fair statement to say counties do business differently now than they did in 1895. And so it would surprise me if we had the same meeting schedule now that we had in 1895. And I would guess, and again, this is just my educated guess, I would guess that the legislature was sending a message to county boards and statute that you have to meet twice a year. You have to meet in April to organize right after the spring election. And then you have to meet in November to establish a levy and adopt a budget. Other than those two things, counties, you're kind of free to do what you want to do. And I think, again, just a guess, I think many counties only met twice a year. There wasn't really a lot that they had to get done that couldn't get accomplished in those two meetings. And so if we're wondering why we have this organizational meeting on the books and why there's a reference to annual meeting, my hunch is that those were the two meetings in statute that the legislature required counties to have. So we have that statutory requirement. What is the purpose of the organizational meeting? And this is deviating a little bit from a statutory requirement into what do we expect an organizational meeting to look like? What is the purpose of the organizational meeting? We're going to establish leadership for the next 2 years. We're going to elect a chair, a vice chair, and other officers of the county board. And again, those other officers can be established within your board rules. But remember, leadership can change. We have a statute on the books that allows for the election of a board chair at any point that the board by majority vote determines that new leadership ought to be installed. And so, yeah, we establish leadership for the next 2 years, but it's not permanent for those 2 years. I just want to make that point and make that clear here. We then assign responsibilities to the various supervisors for committees, boards, commissions, et cetera. I realize that not all of that is done at the organizational meeting, but that's when the process starts. And that's when we ought to start discussing what it means to serve on a committee, what supervisors' interests are, how they express those interests to the board chair or whomever or whatever committee is responsible for appointing committees. And so it's an opportunity for the supervisors to get acclimated in the governance process. We develop a strategy for how things get done. And that's very vague and that's very high level, but that's reality. I think that it's a great opportunity to have an orientation, especially for the new members, but even some returning members might find it beneficial to speak to this concept of how governance works within a particular county, within your county. And so it's an opportunity to orient those new members. And then we establish or reinforce the board's culture. I mean, we talked a lot about this at the last session about the importance of culture. And if we're going to have a culture of professionalism, if we're going to have a culture of efficiency, if we're going to have rules and regulations that allow us to have these meetings in a meaningful way. And so the organizational meeting is an opportunity, and it's the only opportunity you have because it's the only first meeting of a session. There's not going to be another first meeting. This is the first meeting of the session. It's the only opportunity you've got to have that first meeting. So at that first meeting, how are we going to set the tone for the next 2 years? How are we going to let everybody know this is how we do business in our county? And so the organizational meeting, while by statute, we elect leadership and transact other business as allowed by law. In reality, I think the organizational meeting is a critically important meeting. If you do it well, and you set that culture, and you set that tone, you're going to find that you have a much easier job over the next 2 years in maintaining an efficient structure for your government, a culture where you've got professionalism and you get things done. So let's talk a little bit about the required elements of the organizational meeting. The statutes do not contain a required agenda, as I mentioned before, under 5912 at the first meeting after the election. So it doesn't say the organizational meeting. Okay, the statute does not say at the organizational meeting you have to elect a chair, but in reality, the organizational meeting is typically the first meeting after the spring election every 2 years. And so at that first meeting, we elect a chair and we elect a vice chair. Under 5913, we appoint committees. We don't have to do that at the organizational meeting either. The statute 5913 just says we have to do it prior to June 1st, okay? So step one, prepare an agenda. And I'm going to take this a little bit further because we know we're going to prepare an agenda. We know that we're going to work with the county clerk to make sure that we provide appropriate notice to the public from an open meetings law standpoint, letting the public know what it is that we're going to do at the organizational meeting. But I'm going to suggest that you can go so far as to create a script for the organizational meeting. Why are we creating a script for this? Well, because one of the first things we have to do is elect a chair. So who's going to be temporary chair? As I mentioned at the beginning, I've had the privilege in a couple of counties of serving as that temporary chair at the organizational meeting. I had a blast. It was awesome being the temporary chair because, being part of that governance process for the first meeting of a new term of the supervisors, that's incredibly exciting. It's kind of fun. And so as the temporary chair, somebody sitting in that seat, they're not accustomed to running a county board meeting. So perhaps it might help everybody if we had a script as to how this meeting is going to be conducted. So we prepare the agenda. I would suggest that maybe you look at setting a script. And then when it comes to temporary chair, I'll talk about this in a moment about who may be appropriate to be the temporary chair, but understand that person, whomever it is likely not going to be a person who has a lot of experience in running county board meetings. We go into roll call, and then we get into the pomp and circumstance. That's with the oath of office. And so we administer the oath, we have the supervisors sign on the dotted line, and then they take their seat. Use that opportunity with the oath of office to provide some sort of ceremonial import to the process. I think it's really cool when people get up and take that oath. It's a big deal. And so make sure we have pictures, make sure that we develop the appropriate environment where it feels like an official act, because it is an official act. Once we get through the oath of office and the supervisors are seated, we move on to election of officers. We proceed through that business. And then I have on there adoption of rules. Remember, we talked about in the previous webinars about the timing associated with county board rules. And I had suggested that I think it's appropriate that the old board, the outgoing board, go through the process of establishing the county board rules. And then at the first meeting, the organizational meeting, we can have that new body adopt the rules. Now, mind you, the rules can always be amended down the road, and that's just fine. But I think, again, at that very first meeting of the board, it would be great to adopt the rules. Now, that's open for discussion. You don't have to agree with me. You can say, well, that's ridiculous. Let's adopt the rules before we get to the organizational meeting. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just talking about my personal opinion here. I think that it sets the stage for efficiency and effective governance if we adopt those rules at that very first meeting. Then we're going to move on to other business. There may be other business that we have to take care of as a county board at that meeting, and then we adjourn. So then we get to the question, who's the temporary chair? I mean, look at this. Right after call to order, we have to have an election or an appointment related to temporary chair. So who chairs the meeting? Well, the current chair could run the meeting, but I will tell you, if the current chair is also seeking the chairmanship or chairwomanship for the coming term, I don't think it's appropriate to have the current chair that meeting. It ought to be somebody else. Look at the last bullet point on this slide. It shouldn't be someone who's seeking the office. And so then we look at other alternatives. Maybe it's a former chair who was defeated or did not run for office. Maybe it's the vice chair or second vice, county clerk, corporation counsel, someone trusted. Anybody can be the temporary chair of the meeting. In fact, the temporary chair doesn't even have to be a member of the body. As I mentioned, I have been the temporary chair at these meetings, and I am not a member of the body, nor am I an officer or employee of a particular county. And so it's somebody who's trusted, somebody who has the ability to efficiently get through business and, again, set the stage for the organizational meeting and beyond. And so whomever it is, I would put some thought into it as a county, put some thought into it and make sure that you have a discussion with the individual that you believe ought to be temporary chair. And the way that you can do this at the beginning of the meeting, the way I've done it in the few counties where I've been the temporary chair at the organizational meeting, is to take a seat at the front of the meeting and announce that I will be temporary chair absent any objection from the body. Hearing no objection, I will assume the seat of temporary chair until we have a board chair elected, and then we move on into board chair elections. And so it's not a long period. It's not, it doesn't take a lot of time, but again, it's important for establishing and setting the stage for an efficient organizational meeting. Nomination process. If we're getting into this whole process of electing a board chair, How is it that a board chair is nominated? What do we do? Well, you would declare, the temporary chair would declare the floor open for nominations. I hereby open the floor for nominations for the office of board chair for the coming term of the County Board of Supervisors. Do we have any nominations? People can just shout it out all over the room. They can shout it out. They don't even need to be recognized by the chair in order to nominate somebody. Now, we don't want utter chaos. We don't want people yelling names back and forth. And so it's always good to, if you're not recognized, at least not interrupt other speakers, but you don't have to be recognized in order to nominate somebody. Anybody can nominate. Any member of the body can nominate. You can even nominate yourself if that's what you want to do. The chair's job, the temporary chair's job in this circumstance, should restate all of the names that are nominated so that everybody has an understanding of who's been nominated. Now, here's one interesting thing, and I think I might get into this at a later slide. Even if you're not nominated, you're eligible for election so long as you're a member of the board. And so nominations are just a way of showing support for a particular candidate or nominee. And so again, in the nomination process, we want order, and you go through. Now, look at this last bullet point. Nomination speeches are allowed, but there should be a predetermined process. You're not going to find predetermined process in Robert's rules. You're not going to find it in the Wisconsin statutes, but I will tell you that it's important because I can't tell you how many times I've had discussions with county officials about, hey, we're going to have a really contested election as it relates to board chair. How do we deal with this in terms of distribution of literature, speeches, and so on? And we say, what do your board rules say about it? Well, our board rules are silent. Well, we need to come up with a process then. And we have to have a process that everybody thinks is fair and that everybody buys into. And so here is an opportunity to look at your board rules and figure out, do we have a process when it comes to officer elections to allow those nominees to stump? Are they going to be able to get up and talk about why they want to be board chair or first vice or second vice or whatever the case may be? And if we do have a process, do we put time limits on how long they can talk? Do we have a process for distributing literature? Can they distribute literature in support of their candidacy prior to the board meeting? Can they distribute it at the board meeting? What are the limits on that? In other words, think about this, and there's no right or wrong answer, but whatever the answer is that you think makes sense and that a majority of the board agrees is fair and equitable, codify it, put it in your board rules, make sure it's there. That way everybody has an understanding of what it takes to campaign and run for an officer position on the board. There's no second that's required in the nomination process, but somebody can second in order to show support for a particular candidate or nominee. Seconding speeches under Robert's rules, they're allowed, but again, let's have a process for this, okay? Are we going to allow other members of the board to voice their support for a particular nominee and give a speech in support of their position? If the answer is yes, can we establish some sort of process within our board rules to allow them to speak? Are we going to put time limits on it? Things of that nature. And so, again, the more that we can create regularity so that every 2 years we know exactly how the board leadership elections are going to be conducted, the better off we're going to be. Then you have continuity, and again, you have efficiency through the entire organizational meeting process. Nominations, we can have a motion to close nominations. It's not necessary because the temporary chair, once the temporary chair hears that there are no other nominations, the temporary chair can declare the nomination period closed and we move on to an election at that point. But you can close nominations. If there's a motion, it requires a second. And if there's a second, it requires a 2/3 vote. Again, that's typically not used to close nominations unless, and I've heard this before, a motion to close nominations and cast a unanimous ballot in favor of a particular candidate if that candidate is the only name on a ballot. And so that is the process. If we've got an unopposed nominee and the body supports that nominee, there will be a motion to close nominations and cast a unanimous ballot in favor of candidate X. And if that's seconded, you take a vote and you move. Now, Here's another area where Robert's Rules allows us to speed up the process. If we know that that particular nominee is well supported on the board, the temporary chair can say, is there any objection to casting a unanimous ballot in favor of Supervisor X? Hearing no objection, then Supervisor X is now the chair of the board. Congratulations, Supervisor X. Okay. Again, use Robert's Rules in an efficient way as a way to get through business where we know what the outcome is going to be, where we don't even have to take a vote. Here's another misconception under Robert's Rules, and I don't know where this comes from, frankly, but every single county I've been in, I have seen the board chair say, are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? And for the third and final time, are there any other nominations? That has become a custom in every Wisconsin county I've been in. You will find that nowhere in Robert's Rules. All Robert's Rules says is it's the chair's responsibility to provide the body with ample time and opportunity to make a nomination. It says nothing about repeating that particular phrase 3 times. Is there anything wrong with it? No, you can do that. It's fine. It's not like it's wrong or contrary to Robert's Rules, but just know you don't have to say it 3 times. There's no magic to the utterance in 3 different occasions. We get to elections. Again, reinforcing this point that are we going to allow people to stump? Can they get up and give a speech? Can they distribute literature? Can they give a PowerPoint presentation? What is this process for allowing candidates to speak? Let's put that in our board rules. Again, if we have only 1 candidate, we can cast a unanimous ballot. And then we get to the election process itself. In addition to having the temporary chair, we also ought to have certain persons that are trusted that are ballot clerks, okay? I'm going to get into this in a moment, but we have allowance under the Wisconsin statutes to have secret ballot voting here because we're electing officers of the county board. And so we want ballot clerks to distribute the ballots. We want ballot clerks to gather the ballots, and then they count the ballots to determine if we have a victor, okay? Appoint at least 2 people. No single person ought to be the ballot clerk. We ought to have 2 people who are the ballot clerk. And those ballot clerks go through and again, distribute the ballots, collect the ballots, and then count the votes. It's important that these persons be viewed as impartial because we don't want there to be any air of impropriety as it relates to the election of our board chair or the election of other officers of the county board. We want them to have the confidence of the membership. Now, that means, at least in my estimation, that it shouldn't be another board supervisor. Frankly, the board supervisor's job is to vote for a particular candidate. It is not the supervisor's job to be the ballot clerk. Is it appropriate for the county clerk to do it? You bet. I think the county clerk would be perfect in most circumstances. I think it's appropriate for corporation counsel. I think it's appropriate for another county employee or officer, constitutional officer, to act as the ballot clerk, but it really depends on how you want these elections to unfold in your county. Now, I think that you don't have to necessarily identify a particular position within your board rules to say who is going to be a ballot clerk, but it'd be great to have a conversation with those ballot clerks beforehand so that they understand their role as it relates to the election process. This is the only time a secret ballot can be used under Wisconsin law, 19.88 sub 1. It allows us to use a secret ballot. But here's the question that I get all the time. What happens to the ballots once those ballots are cast? Are they a public record? My position is that they are not a public record if they are handwritten, okay? I think that the public's entitled to know the tally of votes in favor or against, or in favor of a particular candidate or another candidate. That's fine. But I mean, I don't want somebody collecting these ballots and analyzing handwriting to determine who voted for whom. That defeats the purpose of having a secret ballot. But there is no blanket exception in the public records law that says all ballots that are received as part of a secret ballot election for county board leadership are exempt from a public records request. So you might get a public records request like that. I think after application of the balancing test, you can likely withhold those ballots, those written ballots, as part of the secret balloting process. I'd highly encourage you to talk to your corporation counsel about that because, again, there's no clear rule on this under Wisconsin law. There's no case, there's no statute. It's my impression that we have a solid defense based upon the balancing test, but your corporation counsel may disagree, and your corporation counsel may have some really good points as a reason for disagreeing. I'm going to pause here for a moment because I'm going to take a look at some of the questions that have come in. Sarah asks, if an unopposed county board member is appointed to an oversight meeting in March, does the appointment expire on April 18, which is the end of the term, and therefore the appointment will need to be submitted again in April? I think it depends, Sarah. It depends upon the nature of the committee or commission to which that person is appointed, because there are particular statutes that relate to a term of office for a particular committee or commission. And so you have to figure out, does the term extend beyond expiration of the current term of the county board of supervisors? Typically, the appointment would end when the new board takes its seats, but there may be statutes that carry it over. Moreover, you could address something like that in your board rules for like a citizen member of committees. You can indicate in your board rules that citizen members of committees carry over into the next term, absent action by the board or board chair, or however you want to put that into your board rules. Question from Joe in Kenosha. Joe always has great questions here. Thanks, Joe. Are there open meetings issues related to campaigning outside of the meetings? It would shock me. It would utterly shock me if anybody campaigned for the position of board chair outside of the actual organizational meeting. I would be shocked. And I hope all of you know that I'm kidding right now when I say that, because I know it happens. Are there open meeting issues related to campaigning outside of meetings? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when we look at the election of the board chair, that is an item of business for the board. In fact, it's identified as an item of business in the statutes. So like any other item of business that comes before the board, if you discuss that item of business outside the confines of the board meeting, you're inviting open meetings law issues. And so as a lawyer, I will tell you, don't do it. Absolutely don't do it. But I know it's going to happen. And so realistically, I think you limit the conversations that are occurring outside that board meeting. You limit trying to create a process where you go person by person by person to establish a number of votes necessary to ensure that you're going to be board chair, even though I know people do that. Just try to avoid it. Try to make it as clean a process as possible. If you're going to do something like that, you are making your corporation counsel's job incredibly difficult. You're making the job of lawyers like me incredibly difficult. So try to avoid it to the extent you can. Chris Nelson says, thanks, Annie, for offering to be our temporary chair in Polk County. As long as you can guarantee me, Chris, that it's going to be 80 degrees and sunny in Polk County come April, I am there with bells on. We've got one more point in the chat. If you already have rules and policies in place, do you just reaffirm them? Yeah, I think it's great at the beginning of the organizational meeting. I'm sorry, I almost said annual meeting. At the beginning of the organizational meeting, I think it's great to read through the rules and say, here's the process that we have. This is the process established in our board rules. That's a great example. Thanks, Lynn. All right. In the absence of a rule to the contrary, we continue to vote until a majority is reached. And when I say that, I mean that every single nominee that is on the ballot is eligible in subsequent elections. All right. So you go through the process of election. You don't have a majority of the board agreeing on who should be chair. Let's say we have 4 candidates on the ballot. You continue with the voting process until you hit a majority. You don't take out the lowest vote getter unless you have a rule saying that you take out the lowest vote getter. Now, I would suggest, and my old colleague Mike Blaska was adamant about this point, you never ever remove the lowest vote getter. Why not? Because by vote 17, that lowest vote getter may become the compromise candidate that everybody can agree upon. So don't take that person off the ballot. At some point, would it be advisable to allow the candidates to readdress the body? Perhaps. Okay, it's up to you, but perhaps. How many votes do you want to get through and how much time do you want to take getting to this board chair? I remember in Milwaukee County, I can't remember the exact number, it was well over 20 different elections before they had a board chair in one circumstance. The election process went on for hours. And so it may get contentious, it may get lengthy, there may be a lot of time here, but let's remember that this is a critically important process, all right? We're electing leadership for the next 2 years of the county board, and that leadership has a significant voice in the appointment of committees. and creating agendas and things like that. So it's an important process. Don't shortchange it. All right. If it takes 27 votes, it takes 27 votes. That's fine. My only suggestion is in the board rules, you may want to establish a process where candidates can readdress the body and things of that nature. And under what circumstances can they readdress? For how long can they readdress? Things like that. All right. Because at that point, the candidates are trying to win the hearts and minds of a majority of the board. So let them give them the opportunity to win the hearts and minds. At some point as well as the temporary chair, you may recognize after vote 27 that, we're just at a standstill here. Why don't we take a brief recess? Let's just calm down. Let's take 10 minutes, get a drink of water, come back and reconvene to have another election. All right. Once we have a winner, once somebody wins this spot as board chair, that board chair takes the seat of the temporary chair and chairs the balance of the organizational meeting. Okay. So that temporary chair, again, through roll call, through the board chair election, and then done. Then temporary chair moves aside. Question from Dennis: how do you vote if you're on Zoom meeting or Teams? That's a great question. I don't know how you do a secret ballot in that circumstance unless you have your IT system set up, and you can kind of talk to your IT department, where there's some special mailbox or something like that where you send in your secret ballot. But there's nothing secret about a Zoom vote or a Teams vote, things like that. And again, this is the only circumstance where we get to have secret ballot voting with counties. But I would talk to IT about creating some sort of mechanism to record a secret ballot vote. Again, you want to make sure that whatever system you set up, that we know that the vote is legitimate, that it came from the person who indicates it came from, and that it's anonymous, it's secret. So there are some challenges there, but I would talk to the IT department about things like that. All right. Again, we don't want to remove the lowest vote getter. We have this whole concept of compromise candidates there. So we get through the elections for the officers, we get through other business and things like that, but we know that this is, again, the only first meeting that we're going to have for this next term of the county board. So what else can we do? How can we set the table? How do we create this platform for success? How do we establish culture? That's where we get into this concept of board training. And I put the word training in quotes because oftentimes Sarah and I, or Mark and Kyle and Sarah and I, we get together and we go to counties and we conduct what's called county board training. I am not qualified to train anybody to be a county board supervisor. I'm going to tell you that right now. And so I don't like the word training, okay? Training suggests to me that you are going to tell people what they need to do. And that's not what county board supervisors do. They're there to represent the electorate. And so I like orientation much better. We're going to orient them to the process. We're going to talk about what it means to be a county board supervisor in our county. We're going to talk about local rules and customs. We're going to establish the culture for our county board. All right. These are the ground rules. This is how we operate. This is how we govern ourselves. This is what we're going to do for the next 2 years. So I want everybody to be on board with this. We're going to talk about state law requirements associated with being a county board supervisor. We're going to talk about Parley Pro, open meetings law, public records. It's also an opportunity for your department heads and constitutional officers to share with the board what they do and what their priorities are over the balance of their term or over the next 2 years. I think it's a great opportunity for do that. And I know several counties that have these concepts, for example, of jail tours that happen either after or within a couple of weeks after the organizational meeting, because the sheriff wants those folks to know what it is he's dealing with or she's dealing with as it relates to operation of the county jail. We have concepts of ride-alongs through the sheriff's office. We have concepts of touring the human service facilities, again, assuming we can meet the confidentiality concerns, but we have these department heads being involved in the orientation process. And I think that's critically important. And I always say this whenever I talk with counties at these orientation sessions, is I say, can you imagine being elected to be a county board supervisor, not being given a job description, being told that chapter 59 of the statute deals with counties, so you leaf through that a little bit. You've seen a couple of the board meetings online, so you have an idea what's going on. You get to that first meeting, and right before you is a proposal from Human Services to approve a budgetary an expenditure $1 million above what the budgeted expenditure is because you had a few placements that required immediate attention. Your head would be spinning. You have no idea. How in the world can you make an informed decision about whether you're going to approve that or not? And so take the opportunity at the organizational meeting to at least provide a baseline level of knowledge about how counties work, what counties are responsible for. And in order to do that effectively, I think you need to involve your constitutional officers and your department heads. All right. I will plug this too. The Counties Association is happy to assist in this orientation process. And it may happen at the organizational meeting, shortly after the organizational meeting, or completely separate. Sarah and I traveled for a county board orientation / training last August. And we went up and had a great discussion with the county board about roles and responsibilities and other different elements associated with orientation. It was awesome. So if you need help in that regard, reach out to the association and ask about the resources that are available. I also know, and this is another plug, Sarah's going to be heavily involved with county officials workshops this coming spring. Those workshops are designed to, again, provide that base level of knowledge to all of your supervisors. And frankly, it's not just the new ones. It is some that are the vets that could use some brush up on some of the elements that we've been talking about here today and other elements. So I would highly, highly encourage you to distribute the information about the county officials workshops that are coming up later this spring. The dreaded F word. How can we make this fun? All right. I'm not saying that it has to be a party, but it should be a celebration. It's a celebration for people who were newly elected. It's a celebration of what you're going to accomplish over the next 2 years. And so how do we create this environment where we are going to establish an environment of collegiality? That's really what I'm talking about here with the dreaded F word of fun. How do we establish this culture of collegiality in a way that we are going to feel empowered, emboldened, and excited about getting the work of the county board done? If you do that successfully at the first meeting, I guarantee you the next 2 years are going to be a lot smoother than if you don't do it successfully. We have to remember the elements of any group or committee that comes together: form, storm, norm, and perform. If you get it wrong at the form stage, you're going to have a terrible storm and you're going to be lucky to get to norm and you'll never reach perform. But if we form in the right way, we know that there will be a bit of disagreement and a bit of argument and discussion about the appropriate way to do things. That's the storm period. But then we quickly get to norm and we quickly get to perform, which is where we need to be. All right. Every county is going to be different. You may have different traditions. I've been at organizational meetings that are more potluck style. Everybody brings in a dessert. That's awesome. That was a lot of fun. And by the way, if you invite me or the Counties Association to any of these orientation exercises, we do love all of the home baked goods and stuff like that. So make sure that's on the agenda. But you have to do it in a way that you think is meaningful to your group, whatever that may be. That's up to you. So let me just check Q&A here quick, because before I get to the recap of the 4-part series. Question: can the orientation take place before the organizational meeting, say on the same day? Absolutely. You can do an orientation whenever you want to do an orientation. The point being is you want to have maximum impact. The way you have maximum impact is have the most people there. So do orientation at a time where you know you're going to drive attendance. And I would highly, highly encourage that you involve your elected officials, your constitutional officers, and your department heads in that orientation process, because you want them to hear the same message. You want everybody to be on the same page. So yeah, you could do it on the same day prior to the organizational meeting. That's awesome. Next question from Michael: would the orientation be more valuable before the organizational meeting rather than after? Yeah, great point. That's that same point that I just provided with Sean. So I think those are great ideas. All right, so let me just, before we open it up to the entire group for questions and comments, and again, this is your opportunity to share, give us great ideas of awesome stuff that you've seen at your organizational meetings. What did we learn in this 4-part series? Hopefully, you're walking away with an understanding that you're going to be intentional about your board rules. What do I mean by that? is that you're going to establish board rules, not because there is some list that you're going to follow to check the box of what's in your board rules, but you're going to think about the issues that you need to address within your county that aren't addressed in state statute, that aren't necessarily addressed in parliamentary procedure, but we know this is the way that we want to govern ourselves in our county. And we want to make sure that this is a permanent feature or semi-permanent feature of how we conduct business. So we're going to put it in our board rules. Let's be intentional about our board rules. You're going to strategize about creating a culture of efficiency and success at the board level. What does it take to govern effectively? And then how do we make sure that we codify those elements to make sure that we are governing effectively? We're going to be deliberate in reviewing our governance structure. Goes along the same points as the previous 2 points. We're going to encourage meaningful collaboration. We're going to encourage folks to get along with one another when they come together in committee meetings to conduct business. Now, that's different than always agreeing. We don't want people to always agree. And that's okay, because different people think different thoughts based upon what the people who elected them to be in that seat think. So that's okay. We're still a representative democracy. But there is a way to disagree in a meaningful way that moves the ball forward, as opposed to just creating controversy. So again, how do we put those types of rules in place to encourage meaningful debate, yet at the same time not allow it to devolve into controversy? Take every opportunity you can at the organizational meeting and beyond to set the stage for success. I think that's critically important. Kim Nass in Dodge County, what are other counties doing between the election and the organizational meeting in regard to committees? Are the county board committees meeting and advancing action item resolutions for action at the April county board meeting? That's a great question, Kim. I often have that question too, is that, the business of Dodge County doesn't stop just because the election rolled around at the beginning of April and we have to wait until the third Tuesday to have an organizational meeting. There's still things that need to get done. So Kim's question is do you have a meeting where you approve certain things? Are there committees that meet in April? If so, who comprises that committee? What do you do? And the statutes, again, don't give us a clear answer on that. That's more or less left to the particular counties as to how you want to conduct business. And so if anybody has any ideas there, feel free to share. Because we are at the official Q&A part of this presentation. And in previous presentations, I didn't get to the last slide. This is incredibly important too, because I realize that none of you are doing this for a paycheck, all right? And people out there who think you are sorely mistaken, because frankly, I've seen your paychecks. They're not that big. You all are doing this because you love your county and you love county government. So as somebody who serves counties, thank you for your commitment, because you make my job enjoyable, all right? So thank you for your service to Wisconsin County government. So questions and comments that we have from the group, or if anybody wants to provide Kim with some insight as to the process they use. A question from Sarah, could you talk about adjourning sine die? And somebody out there is going to tell me that I pronounced the Latin phrase wrong. That's fine. I always say sine die, but sine die is a way to close a session, all right? So if you adjourn sine die, you're saying that the entire session for this particular body is done. No more action can be taken, period. It gets into this whole concept of what is a session of the county board. What happens to resolutions that the previous board adopted? Do those resolutions continue with the next board? So you get into all of these weird issues. If you adjourn sine die by parliamentary procedure, that means that everything is shut off, done, all right? I have concerns with adjourning sine die. My concerns are if you have measures that are going to carry forward from March to April to May, what happens if you adjourn sine die in March to those initiatives or those items that you've already approved? So I don't like adjourning sine die, frankly. But again, talk to your corporation counsel, because there may be a reason that you want to adjourn sine die. For example, if you want to expire resolutions from the previous board, you may want to adjourn sine die. Frankly, I think it's a good opportunity within your board rules to discuss this concept of what happens to those resolutions. So I would really encourage you to address that within your board rules. But sine die is just so permanent and it's such a hard stop that I personally don't like adjourning sine die. Other questions and comments? Sarah, what'd I miss?
I don't know as if you missed anything, Andy. I'm just thinking we should play Stump Andy at this point and hope folks have some good questions for you.
I like that. Was I right that you and I like the baked goods though? I always like that.
Oh yeah, baked goods are always good. Baked goods are always good.
I always like that.
And again, I'll say too, if folks are looking for assistance with their meetings from the Wisconsin Counties Association, feel free to reach out to me. And I can work on, scheduling with myself or other WCA staff.
And I also want to note for the record that you'll see I've got a tie on today. It's because this is the last part of the 4-part series and I wanted to look very official. So I'm hoping that everybody out there is incredibly impressed that I wore a tie to this.
I know I was, Andy.
Thanks, sir.
All right.
Doesn't look like we have anything. Oh, here we
no,
go.
There's a question.
Have the dates for the new officials training in April been set yet? And Larry said he loves the tie. Thank you, Larry, for the compliment. Sarah, when's the cows training? We call it county official workshop.
The cows training will be taking place in the month of May, over I think a 3-week period. I have to say I don't believe that we have confirmed in working with the folks at local government education at the local government center, the actual locations. So I can't give you a definitive yet on the dates, but they are going to be occurring over a 3-week period in May. And then we also decided this year to add an additional county officials workshop virtually. So it would be a day-long virtual session for folks that aren't comfortable or aren't able to travel. So there will be multiple opportunities for folks to join us in either, I can't remember if it's 6 or 7 locations physically, and then 1 location will be virtual as well.
Sean indicated it's another great webinar. Thank you. You're very welcome, Sean. I'm glad you enjoyed it and glad you were able to attend.
You have a
Question for Dennis. When do the new supervisors assume power, on the 3rd Tuesday, or do the previous supervisors still have power? And if you look at the way that the statutes read, they formerly read that there was a hard stop when we hit the election date, or at least that argument can be made. You know, there are certain offices in the Wisconsin statutes that have the phrase until a successor is elected and qualified. That was not in the statutes as it related to county board supervisors. You might remember that the association had a huge concern back in 2020 with the spring elections, that if those elections were postponed, there would be an argument and somebody out there may raise a claim that we don't have any board members because their term ended 2 years from the date that they were elected. And so from our perspective as the county association, we took a look at the statutes, suggested a change, and the legislature made the change to say that the supervisors sit until their successors are elected and qualified. So what does it mean to be qualified? Well, we know what it means to be elected, but what does it mean to be qualified? They take the oath of office. And so it would be my impression, again, talk to your corporation counsel if you have specific concerns, but it'd be my impression that the old supervisors sit until the organizational meeting, at which point the oath is administered.
All right, last call for questions.
All right, final plug, Sarah. We got Ledge Exchange that's coming up in a few weeks. I cannot wait to see everybody again. Hopefully you can make it to the Ledge Exchange. I've taken a peek at the agenda and it's a great agenda. And so I look forward to seeing you there. Otherwise, everybody stay involved in this process. This has been a great webinar series because before we used to have a 1-day discussion on this in Stevens Point, but I think having this webinar series to take it out over a 4 to 6 week period, great questions come up. I think people are thinking about these different issues. So keep up the great work, everybody, on thinking about these issues. And again, thanks for your dedication in making your county efficient and a great county. So thanks for the opportunity.
I was going to say again, thank you so much for participating in our 4-part series. We, look forward to seeing you all again at the Ledge Exchange, at our WCA district meetings, as well as at our county officials workshops. Andy, there's one more question here.
Yeah, I can't help Wally. He's asking.
I can help Wally.
Go
I
for it.
can help Wally. The question is, what is the link to view the entire series? So the series is on the WCA website, www.wicounties.org. From there, click on the events tab. Then you will click on past event materials. And there is where you will find all 4 weeks of the video as well as the PowerPoint presentations. All right. I'm going to go with that was the last question. So again, thank you guys so much for your participation over these last several weeks of our webinar series. And again, as questions continue to pop up, you did not lose your opportunity. Feel free to contact the WCA office, and we're certainly happy to answer any additional questions that may come up following the series. So again, thank you so much. Hope you guys have a good day.
Thank you.